don't be afraid to just make that really awkward connection, because if you don't, you're right where you are. And if you do, maybe after that conversation, you'll still be right where you are, but maybe you'll be somewhere further along in the road.
This is the Happen to Your Career podcast with Scott Anthony Barlow.
We help you stop doing work that doesn't fit you, figure out what does, and make it happen.
We help you define the work that is unapologetically you and then go get it.
If you feel like you were meant for more and you're ready to make a change, keep listening.
Here's Scott.
Here's Scott.
Here's Scott.
So tell me if you've ever had this thought when you were wanting to change jobs. It goes along these lines. If only I could simply hop onto a job board, plug in the right keywords, and then poof, have my ideal career appear. If you've listened to this podcast for a while, or if you've ever searched for jobs online, you know that this is not at all how it works. But many, many people believe it is and wonder what the heck they're doing wrong. So what if I told you the connection to your ideal role isn't buried somewhere on the internet, waiting for you to put in the magical keyword spell or take the right assessment or anything else? But what if instead it was much, much closer than that? Maybe it was through a past coworker, a fellow parent, or your kid's sports league, or maybe even your neighbor.
I started asking everyone, hey, do you know anyone that works in the toys and games industry? I asked our across the street neighbors. They came over and our kids played. And that's when she said, well, I know someone who works in the playground industry. Is that toys and games? And I said, yeah, absolutely, sure.
That's Travis Van Osprey. Travis had worked in construction trades, specifically in custom cabinets, for most of his career. And he kept finding himself in the same cycle. He would get bored, feel stuck, find a new job, get excited about it, and then rinse and repeat. Even after going back to school and transitioning into project management, he still felt like he just couldn't escape the cabinetry world. After 5 jobs in 6 years, he knew he needed out. He was uncertain about what he wanted to do next, but was certain that he was done with cabinetry. So we got to meet him when he reached out to us for guidance. In our conversation, you'll hear how a breakthrough with our team really propelled him into action. But here's what I want you to pay attention to. His willingness to connect with anyone and everyone he came across. He's going to walk us through the connections that he made and the conversations he had in detail in what he said, how he connected, how he followed up. These details will be very helpful in explaining how you can leverage your network to uncover your next role. All right, here's Travis taking us back to where his career in cabinetry began.
My dad was a general contractor. And so I grew up with a wood shop in the garage. It was always assumed that if the bed frames I slept on as a kid, my dad made. The dressers, my dad made. It was just kind of like, that was the household we grew up in. And, Lego family, Lincoln Logs, those were the toys. And I was really into theater as a kid. When I was in high school, I wanted to be on Broadway. And then when I realized I wasn't a very good actor, I decided that I would get into technical theater. So that was actually my very first major when I went to Portland State. I was a technical theater major, and I thought I would be a set designer and a set builder. So after I dropped out and came back home, I was doing community theater. I was trying to get an internship as a set builder, set designer, just get into that world. And someone suggested that I take a 2-semester certificate course at the community college for furniture making and cabinet making as a way to say, look, I'm comfortable with a table saw. I can use hand tools. I know how to read drawings. And in the course of that year that it took to get that certificate, I realized there was a much more stable career, let's say.
Yes.
In custom cabinets than there was working stipend to stipend in community theater. So that was 2010, which was also right after the recession. So I went to a lot of cabinet shops and just said, "Hey, I'm totally green. Bring me on as an apprentice." And they said, "We are not hiring right now." I was getting my hair cut, and I told the barber, I have this, but no one's hiring. And he said, "Oh, my old childhood friend has a cabinet shop. Why don't I connect you with him?" And so that was how I got my first job in cabinets. I wasn't there very long, but it let me apply to a job with Berkeley Mills, which is a really high-end custom shop. They do furniture, they do cabinets. They've got a great reputation in the Bay Area for being like the best woodwork shop in the area. And I got in there when I was 20 years old, and really that's where I cut my teeth. That's where I got all my experience. I worked in pretty much every department from finishing to installation to assembly, did furniture, I did cabinets, and it like really scratched that itch of blending the building of my dad's general contracting and like the art of theater, because it was very much craft centric and not as much manufacturing.
Yes.
It wasn't stamp out these cabinets as fast as possible. It was like make something that's museum quality. And that really imprinted on me. And first of all, it made it hard for them to have enough money to pay their employees what they deserved, because the profit margin was so slim,
Sure.
because the time took so long and the materials were so expensive. So I bounced around in the cabinet industry, going from shop to shop, and no one else had that same touch of craftsmanship over production. Once I realized the fun of working in a wood shop was work, I said, okay, well, maybe if I got an office job, then I could have a hobby of woodworking in my free time. So I did night school. I transferred to 4-year university. Then, right after I finished my coursework and called up the cabinet shops that I knew, and I said, "Do you need a project manager?" And they said yes. So I I took the first job that was offered to me as a project manager for the company's called Muller Nichols, and I worked in their cabinet shop, but they also had a general contracting division. And so I was project managing for their general contractor. So residential remodel work.
So, what prompted you to realize that you needed a larger career change in one way or another, or that was going to be the right thing for you?
So when I first started that, I'm not going to be able to be a cabinet maker. I was like 25.
Yeah.
And I was like, I cannot do this for 40 years. I feel like I've reached the pinnacle of my development. Like, yes, I could always become a more skilled cabinet maker, but I had grown kind of exponentially. And then I was looking at the horizon, and it was a long, flat path. And so I just didn't know how to articulate transferable skills. I don't know what to type into Indeed to search for something that I'm qualified for that has a different job title, because Indeed is going to look at my resume and churn out 100 jobs that I'm already doing.
Yeah. Here you go. You've been in custom cabinets. Here are 47 more jobs that are exactly what you want to try to move away from. So
exactly.
What I'm really curious about for you, as you began to go through an intentional career change process here, which was, I think you've had a number of really great situations. And as you said, you've felt like serendipitously, many things have worked out for you at different periods of time in your career in really weird and wonderful ways. Also, at the same time, it had sounded like you had been unhappy with it for a period of time. And I think as you got into working and trying to define what extraordinary looked like for you, I know you and your coach had a pretty cool breakthrough on your ideal career profile. And I'm wondering if you would be willing to share that story and share a little bit about how you pinpointed what you wanted to go after as far as organizations or roles.
Yeah. So we had done the first couple of modules where I had defined my, gotten my signature strengths, and I had kind of defined what my ideal workday would be like. And those first things where you're kind of writing down, what do I want?
Yeah.
And then it was like, okay, well, now what do I do with this? And I didn't know who I had identified that the social Goldilocks was going to be the best way for me to do the career experiments.
Yeah. And for everybody's information, so the social Goldilocks is where, much like the Goldilocks story, where it's like, this chair is too small, this chair is too big, this chair's just right. Being able to go through and have a large amount of conversations relatively quickly to get lots of feedback about what falls into that just right category and what's not. So a little bit of context
Exactly.
there. So as you were going into that, tell me more.
So I was talking to Amy, and I was thinking, where do I start? Who do I ask? How do I break down that first barrier of what direction do I go in? And she kind of asked me, okay, hypothetical here, money is of no consequence. You have your whole day to yourself. What would you do if you could do anything? And I thought about it, and I said, I'd probably spend more time playing with my daughter. I would, I'd play more softball. I'd join a couple more softball leagues. I'd play some golf during the week. I would, you know what? I've been meaning to play that new Zelda game. I would love to have more time to play video games. And she was like, okay, Travis, you just said play about 5 times in 15 seconds. So let's focus in on play. And I was like, oh, okay, yeah. She said, have you thought about the toy industry, the games industry? Um, and that really was it. That was where I thought, okay, I don't know who's going to pay me to play, but let me get on LinkedIn and see who I know who might have a second connection at Hasbro or Wizards of the Coast. And that was really it. That started the snowball rolling down the hill and ended with me working for a playground company. Really, really pretty fantastic.
Which is phenomenal. And we're going to break down a little bit here in a minute more of how that happened. What I think is really powerful in what you just described, though, is a lot of the times there's, well, I mean, if you Google on the internet, there's all kinds of questions out there all over the place about what would you do if you could do things for free, which is a great question. It's a great place to start, but is usually several layers deeper, only with being able to observe those patterns, those behavioral patterns, as well as tendencies, as well as your preferences and desires, that you can begin to start to figure out what's the gold there? What are the situations? And what I heard you say is that at the work that we were doing, you and Amy in this particular case, were looking at and noticing that play comes up over and over and over again. And that was the kernel, right?
But what's really interesting is I don't remember if it was in the Figure It Out course or early in Module 1. There was a question about list 3 careers that you could do if it was a total fantasy. You didn't need any experience.
Sure.
And I put down I would be a sheep farmer, or maybe I would be a professional entertainer, a singer, or a YouTuber, or a television personality. None of those had play. And that was me sitting in my office alone, trying to brainstorm 3 things that I think would be fun.
Yeah.
But it wasn't until I had the other person in the room with me, kind of as a soundboard, to get me to be a little bit more candid or a little less in my own head about it. It was just like, here's a question, answer it. I didn't have time to sit there and brainstorm or write down some ideas and scratch them out. It's just like, oh, you know what? I'd play with my daughter more if I had more time. Like, absolutely. Just like, okay, well, let's find a way where you can have a career playing with your daughter.
Yeah. It's really interesting, the point you bring up, because in many ways, it is the way that our brains work as humans. It's almost impossible to do this alone. It's not impossible, but it's very, very difficult to. And so it's like you mentioned softball earlier. If you were going to go out and do batting practice, yes, you can do that with a pitching machine. That is a possibility, but you get the best practice with a live other human pitching the ball to you in one way or another.
It's certainly a whole lot more fun.
Yeah. And it's way more fun. So that I think that there's a lot of parallels there where having another person teeing it up for you in a variety of different ways, literally and metaphorically, then that just creates this level of effectiveness that's really hard to replicate. That's
absolutely.
I love that point. So let me ask you another thing about that too, then. You know, when you figured out this idea of play, it seemed like at that point in time, you were talking to quite a few different people at a number of different organizations. Can you tell me a little bit about that? Let's get into the details there. How did you go about making those connections? Maybe give us a couple examples of what worked and what didn't work as well for you.
So that was really a case of rip the Band-Aid off, get outside your comfort zone, and then you quickly realize that your comfort zone has just expanded.
Yeah.
So the first couple of emails I sent out were very awkward, and I was very uncomfortable sending it and asking. I went on LinkedIn, I looked at Mattel and Hasbro, and I saw that Noelle was a connection with my friend Will. So I text messaged my friend Will. I said, hey, would you be comfortable introducing me to her? I have a template. If you want to just, I'll send you the template and you just say, hey, I'm connecting you with my friend Travis. And he said, yeah, sure. No skin off my nose. Worst thing that can happen is that your situation doesn't change and you're exactly where you started. I talked to Noelle for 20 minutes. And, I ended every conversation with, is there anyone else I should talk to? And she said, let me think about it. And I never heard back from her, and it's kind of like, okay, well, on to the next one, I guess. And it was the first attempt. I started asking everyone, hey, do you know anyone that works in the toys and games industry? I asked our across the street neighbors. They came over and our kids played. And that's when she said, well, I know someone who works in the playground industry. Is that toys and games? And I said, yeah, absolutely. Sure. Like, connect me with them. I'll see if I can find a link there. So that's what it eventually led to me getting my current role, was this connection from the across the street neighbor. But that took 7 months to come to fruition. And meanwhile, I just started going back and thinking, okay, I got back into that loop of, okay, well, now what job title do I type in to Indeed to see if Hasbro is hiring for a blank? I like advertising a lot. I've always been like a really critical eye for commercials and billboards, and I like the idea of put this package together to get the most people to look at it. And so then I changed my LinkedIn search to who am I connected to that works in marketing? Let's just see. I don't know what I would do, but maybe I can narrow down the field like I did between the two toy companies. So one of my wife's longtime friends is a freelance marketer. And I said, hey, Tracy, I'm doing this career change. Do you have 15 minutes just to give me like marketing 101? Is this something I should pursue, or do I put it in the round file and move on to the next one? And so I took 30 minutes with Tracy, and she said, okay, there's email marketing specialists. She listed off 6 or 7 different branches of marketing. And I was kind of like, none of that sounds, SEO, search engine optimization on your website. That's not the kind of marketing that I thought I would be interested in. And then she said, well, there's product marketing managers that kind of are the go-between to the sales and the marketing and the consumer. And they kind of just make sure that everyone's on the same page. And, you're the advocate for the end user, and you're the advocate for the sales to make sure that marketing is getting them the material that they need to provide the end user with what they want.
Yeah.
And I thought, well, that sounds right up my alley. That's very much project management. Sounds very social, interdepartment. Learn a little bit about sales, learn a little bit about the client, learn a little bit about marketing, and be kind of this information hub. And that was the next little snowball that I needed to start rolling down the hill.
That's cool. So what happened from there?
So from there, I was looking at product marketing. I was looking at toys, games, playgrounds. I signed up there's a product marketing alliance, which is I don't even know how I would define it, a resource for product marketers where they can have social events, they can do learning. And it was like $100 digital course on introduction to product marketing. And I did that. And now that's on my LinkedIn to say, I'm interested in product marketing. I know my resume doesn't look like I have any experience in this, but you can tell that I'm interested because I've paid money to get a certificate that says I'm interested. And through just constant conversations, I would talk to one funny story is a friend of my brother's. I talked to Ezra, who's a freelance copywriter, and he said, "You know what? The sounds your search for a fun job in the play industry. Why don't you talk to my dad? My dad was a very early video game engineer and has made a career." So I went from talking to my brother's friend to Ezra's dad, and Ezra's dad said, "Oh, well, talk to my wife." Okay, so I talked to Mrs. Fox, and it was these really weird connections where I would never think that I should be having a conversation with my brother's friend's parents about my career change. But through them, I got connected with a guy who does toys in Redwood City. And through him, I got to a woman who does the playtesting for EA games. And I think that right there is the link between the two paths of play and product marketing.
Yes.
Where as I started to go down that product marketing path, I realized the triangle between end user, sales, and marketing, I was most interested in end user and most interested in researching what does the user want. I really like the idea of market research, play testing, observing people using the product and getting their responses. And so that was really, I connected with a woman who does that at Hasbro. Hasbro has their own play lab, but it turns out it's in Rhode Island. And if I wanted to work for Hasbro
go to Rhode
in the play
Island.
lab, we would move to Rhode Island. And that's just not an option for us where we're at.
Yeah. Not on your ideal career profile. That's a deal breaker.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. So then I thought, okay, well, there's lots of video games in the Bay Area. I got connected with this woman who does the playtesting for EA. And, I just kind of, that was a really interesting, exciting part for me. And that was a lot of my when I was talking to these researchers was if I were to take an online course at Coursera or something, what should I be looking at in order to just have something on my resume that says I want to work in user research?
So you're trying to figure out at that point, what would it take to develop a minimum level experience in order to move that direction if you wanted to? Is that right?
Exactly. Yes.
Very cool.
Yes.
Okay. So I want to pull you back over to another topic here. You did this really wonderful job. If we're just trying to summarize here, you did a great job identifying what could potentially fit, did a great job of exploring that, and and beginning to get feedback and then utilizing that feedback to go and dive deeper after you were getting, say, for example, the indications that, hey, I really might be interested in a toy company like Hasbro or Mattel. How do I dive deeper into that? And then utilizing that next set of feedback to be able to make additional decisions and then dive deeper over and over again to the point where you had this really very good set of definitions around a lot of different areas about what you wanted, not just for the organization, but also started figuring out, how do I test these different roles or opportunities as well? And so here's what I am curious about. Let's jump ahead for just a moment and say, okay, you've accepted this new offer.
Mm-hmm.
When you think back now to your ideal career profile, what fits on that? What are the areas where you're like, oh yeah, this totally checks some of the boxes that I discovered that I actually want in one way or another?
Yeah. So I went through and I looked at the offer and I filtered it through the ICP, and it met the minimums for everything except for income. And that was a really hard thing to come to terms with, because all of the personal, all of the, that I work from home.
Yeah.
So my minimum was less than an hour commute. Well, now I drop my daughter off at daycare, I come back home and I get on my computer. That's my commute. Under helping others, I said I want to be face to face with the people I'm helping, and I must be a source of expertise that people turn to for help. So as a project manager for a playground company that I manage the installation, I'm in the field. I'm seeing not only the contractors that we work with. I go out tomorrow. I'm going to go out to San Francisco and I'm going to fix a little playground that's already been installed. There's going to be kids on it playing, swinging, laughing while I'm out there. Like, that doesn't get more face to face with the people I'm helping than the children who use this playground equipment every day. And so we went through, and it was just like, some of them it met my ideals. Again, the commute for my ideal would be 5 to 20 minutes. Again, like right there. Engaging work. Work doesn't feel like work, but instead feels like play. I think that going and climbing on a playground to replace a couple of nuts and washers is
Right
pretty great.
Yeah.
Supportive coworker and boss. Like everything was spot on except the pay, and that was really hard to come around to. Their American headquarters is in Austin, and I'm in the Bay Area, California. And the cost of living is something like 165% of the cost of living in Austin. And it's like considerably gas, housing, food, everything costs more out here. And so when I told them my salary expectations, they're like, whoa, we are miles apart. So that was a really awkward, uncomfortable conversation. I had never negotiated a salary before. And I was able to get to a point where they said, this is absolutely the maximum that we can afford to pay you. And what it ended up being was a lateral move from my previous position. It wasn't a pay increase, and it didn't quite meet what my wife and I said were going to be our budgetary requirements, our necessities. But the way I was able to kind of wrap my head around it was, I said, if this meets all of these other criteria, it will lighten my emotional load and free me up to do kind of those side projects that I've always said I just don't have the time or energy to do, to make you a picture frame that I could then ask someone for $100 for. Or I've always had this idea of having a podcast or having a YouTube channel. Now I might have the energy and the time to say, you know what, I don't need to, I'm not so exhausted that I need to go to bed at 9 o'clock. I'll stay up and I'll edit that video of me on the golf course or whatever it is. and put it on YouTube. Like I've got kind of more drive to do those side projects.
So for
And
you, let me make sure that I understand. So for you, you were saying, okay, look, I still want to make this amount of income. And it sounds like part of what you were realizing, if I'm understanding correctly, is that there might be multiple ways to do this. Taking the new income, which was a lateral adjustment, it sounds like. So same as what you were making before, which is good, but it's not
which
what
is
you
great.
wanted. It's not what you wanted.
Exactly.
So then you're saying, okay, well, how do I, with my total career, if we're looking at that holistically, look at how to supplement that to get that up to what I want? Is that what you're saying?
Exactly.
That's awesome.
Exactly. Exactly. The ideal career profile is more a definition of my life
Yes.
than a definition of my job description. But the other thing it has is it's a big enough organization where I feel like there's room to grow. I still think that maybe I can, I've already reached out to the marketing department and said, like I'd love, they have their own research team that researches play and children and how they interact with their equipment and how they can better design their equipment to meet children's developmental needs. And so maybe they need a product marketing manager. It's
Yeah.
not currently a role that they have, but I figure let me start doing some of that work. And in a little while I can say, hey, look, I've gotten to the point where I'm bored with my current job and I've been taking on some of these product marketing ideas. Maybe I could transition within the company.
Well, and I think that is, I mean, that's something that when you have gone through the collective set of experiences that you've now gone through, then it puts you in a different position to be able to continue to negotiate. And I mean, we're here as a continuous career partner for anything that you need, but I would encourage you to keep going that direction, because I think that you had that conversation, you did a great job negotiation. You got them to move. You got them to their absolute maximum, which is
Yes.
great. Now it's a point of saying, okay, do I supplement my income through someplace else? Or do I continue to find ways where you can add real value to the organization so that you can raise that income in one way or another, or both, potentially?
Yeah,
Like that could be a scenario
absolutely.
too.
And I'm still a member of the Product Marketing Alliance. I'm still
Yeah.
getting their emails, and they have a meetup next Friday where we just go out and get drinks with other product marketers in the area. And I'll just continue to keep an eye on that path, keep one eye, look in that direction, build some skills in the background. Um, I should also mention, as part of my negotiation, I said it won't show up on my salary, but would you pay for me to get my project manager's
Yeah.
professional certificate, PMP certificate? And they said, yeah, okay, I think we can swing that. And that was just like, okay, so it doesn't show up on my paycheck, but it is an expense that they will shoulder that I don't, and that I carry with me. So
That's
there was a lot of
fantastic.
ways to kind of just continue to shape and mold the opportunity into something.
Travis, when you were back 7, 8, 9 months ago here, did you think this type of opportunity was possible in this way for you? What were your thoughts at that point in time? I'm so curious with how you were looking at it
Yes,
then
I
versus now.
did. I did drink the HTYC Kool-Aid, and I believed that a better career was possible. I remember talking to my brother and my mom,
Yeah.
who were both very skeptical about the idea of a unicorn role. They're like, no, every job has its drawbacks. Every job has a thing where you're not going to like it. Every job. So I don't want you to get your hopes up and get really disappointed when you're not able to find. And I was like, no, 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 you have to believe that it's out there, or else you kind of stop fighting for yourself. You kind of resign yourself to, I guess this is as good as it gets.
Which is the
Might as well
definition of
just
settling, right?
Exactly. And so I was a real, I was in. I had to believe that it was out there, or else I was just going to stay exactly where I had been for the last 10 years.
Well, I think you've done a really great job creating this opportunity for yourself, which then allows you to be able to pivot in many different directions. I think that's the coolest thing as I think about your story as a whole, in looking at all this work that you've done through your career change. I think that's maybe the coolest element here from my perspective is now you have this situation in which you could go a lot of different directions, all which are in potential alignment with not just your minimums, but also your ideals. And I think that's pretty amazing. It takes a lot of work to be able to get to that point. That's really cool.
Yeah, I'm excited. I love to the thing about the social Goldilocks was it just opened a lot of doors, and you didn't have to necessarily walk through every door, but they're open now, and I can turn and go into another one at some point if I choose.
What advice would you give to somebody who is in your shoes where you were at maybe a year ago, where you know that you need to make a change and you're trying to figure out how to navigate through that? What advice would you give to that person?
I would probably just be not sure how I want to word it. Not making a change doesn't change anything. Do something, because the worst that can happen is that nothing changes.
Are you saying that waiting and seeing rarely works out, or what?
I don't be afraid to just make that really awkward connection, because if you don't, you're right where you are. And if you do, maybe after that conversation, you'll still be right where you are, but maybe you'll be somewhere further along in the road.
Most of the episodes you've heard on Happen to Your Career showcase stories of people that have taken the steps to identify and land careers that they are absolutely enamored with, that match their strengths and are really what they want in their lives. If that's something that you're ready to begin taking steps towards, that's awesome. And we want to figure out how we can help. So here's what I would suggest. Take the next 5 seconds to open up your email app and email me directly. I'm going to give you my personal email address, scott@happentoyourcareer.com. Just email me and put conversation in the subject line. And when you do that, I'll introduce you to someone on our team who can have a super informal conversation with, and we'll figure out the very best type of help for you, whatever that looks like, and the very best way that we can support you to make it happen. So send me an email right now with conversation in the subject line. Here's a sneak peek into what we have coming up in store for you next week.
I finally realized that it's okay to not settle. And it's funny because I feel like I haven't settled in any other area of my life. And so why would I do so professionally?
Okay, what happens when you went through school and then college, and then you sort of always knew what the next step would be? But now you're at a point in your career when you can't see the next step anymore, and it turns into a special kind of torture. It can seem like a trivial thing, but it's actually a very real and jarring experience when you're used to knowing what is coming for you, what is the next step, and always being able to imagine your future. Turns out, it's now up to you to figure out what to do next. But luckily, you're listening to the perfect podcast to help you figure that out. All that and plenty more next week right here on Happen to Your Career. Make sure that you don't miss it. And if you haven't already, click subscribe on your podcast player so that you can download this podcast in your sleep and you get it automatically, even the bonus episodes, every single week, sometimes multiple times a week. Until next week, adios. I'm out.